On June 18, 2019, 31-year-old Rebecca Torres set up her orange tent at the Slough Creek Backcountry Campsite in Yellowstone National Park. According to the wilderness permit she filed 3 days earlier, she planned to spend 5 nights photographing wolves in the Lamar Valley before returning to her job as a veterinary technician in Bozeman, Montana. She never made it back to her car. 4 months would pass before a maintenance crew preparing campsites for winter closure would notice something peculiar about the ground beneath where her tent had stood. What they uncovered would transform a missing person case into one of the most disturbing investigations in the park's 147-year history. Rebecca Torres was known among her colleagues at Mountain View Animal Hospital as someone who understood animals better than people. According to her supervisor, Dr. Janet Mills, Rebecca could calm the most aggressive dogs with just her presence and seemed to sense what was wrong with an animal before running any tests. She spent her vacation days in the wilderness, always alone, photographing wildlife with the same patience she showed in the clinic. Her Instagram account, still active today, shows hundreds of images of wolves, bears, and elk, each accompanied by detailed notes about animal behavior and habitat conditions. On the morning of June 15th, Rebecca stopped at the Albright Visitor Center near the park's north entrance to pick up her backcountry permit. The ranger who processed her paperwork noted in the log that she seemed well prepared, carrying a bear canister, GPS device, and emergency beacon. According to the permit records, she requested campsite 2S5, one of the most remote sites in the Slough Creek drainage, accessible only by hiking 11 miles through grizzly territory. The ranger reminded her about proper food storage and recent wolf activity in the area. Rebecca, according to his testimony, smiled and said she was counting on the wolves being active. The trail to Slough Creek winds through lodgepole pine forests and open meadows before dropping into a valley carved by ancient glaciers. According to GPS data recovered later, Rebecca made good time, reaching her campsite by 4:30 p.m. on June 18th. The site sits on a small rise above the creek, surrounded by willows and offering clear views of the meadows where elk graze at dawn and dusk. She sent a text to her roommate at 6:47 p.m. Made it. Paradise found. Saw fresh wolf tracks by the creek. Going dark for a few days. Her phone, set to airplane mode to preserve battery, never transmitted another message. 3 hikers passed through the area on June 20th and noticed Rebecca's tent from the trail. According to their statement, nothing seemed unusual except that the tent's rainfly was partially unzipped despite threatening weather. They assumed she was out photographing and continued their hike. On June 21st, a backcountry ranger doing routine patrols noted the tent's location in his log but didn't make contact, as solo campers often spend entire days away from their sites. The ranger would later testify that something felt off about the complete stillness around the tent, but he attributed it to the approaching storm system. Rebecca was due back at work on June 24th. When she didn't appear, her colleagues initially assumed she'd extended her trip, something she'd done before, when wildlife viewing was particularly good. But when she missed a scheduled surgery, on June 25th, without calling, Dr. Mills contacted Rebecca's emergency contact, her sister Sarah, in Colorado. Sarah hadn't heard from Rebecca since June 14th, but wasn't immediately concerned, knowing her sister's habit of going off-grid. It wasn't until June 26th when Rebecca's roommate mentioned the "going dark" text that Sarah called the Park Service. The initial response was measured. According to park protocols, solo backcountry campers often extend their stays, and cell service is non-existent in most wilderness areas. Rangers were dispatched to check campsite 2S5 on the morning of June 27th. What they found triggered an immediate escalation. Rebecca's tent was intact, but empty. Her sleeping bag was laid out as if she'd been sleeping, but her camera, the expensive Canon system she was known to guard obsessively, was missing. Her backpack leaned against a tree, food properly stored in the bear canister, boots placed neatly at the tent entrance. But Rebecca herself was nowhere to be found. The search began within the hour. According to the incident commander's report, the initial assumption was that Rebecca had suffered an accident while photographing wildlife, possibly falling into the creek or encountering a bear. Search teams focused on game trails leading from the campsite to known wildlife viewing areas. Dog teams were brought in from Bozeman, and a helicopter swept the drainage patterns where an injured person might seek shelter. The dogs picked up Rebecca's scent leading from the tent toward the creek, but lost it at the water's edge, suggesting she might have crossed or walked in the stream. By day 2 of the search, over 40 personnel were involved. According to search and rescue protocols, they established a grid pattern covering 5 square miles around the campsite. Divers checked deep pools in Slough Creek where the current could trap a body. Thermal imaging flights ran at dawn and dusk when a heat signature would be most visible. The search teams noted unusually little wildlife activity in the area. According to one rescuer's report, even the birds seemed absent, creating an oppressive silence, broken only by radio chatter and the sound of searchers calling Rebecca's name. On June 29th, a searcher found what appeared to be camera lens cap near a game trail half a mile from the campsite. The cap, confirmed to match Rebecca's Canon equipment, was the only physical evidence discovered during the 5-day intensive search. It was found at the base of a lodgepole pine, partially buried in pine needles, as if it had been dropped rather than fallen. The area around the tree showed no signs of struggle, no disturbed earth, no torn clothing, nothing to indicate what might have happened there. The search expanded to include areas where Rebecca might have wandered in a disoriented state. According to wilderness medicine experts consulted by the Park Service, hypothermia, altitude sickness, or a head injury could cause someone to walk for miles in confusion. Teams checked ridge lines where someone might climb seeking cell service, caves where an injured person might shelter, and avalanche chutes where a fall could leave someone invisible from above. Each location turned up nothing. On July the 2nd, the active search was scaled back to limited operations. According to park policy, resources had to be balanced against the probability of finding a survivor. Rebecca's family protested, hiring private search teams who continued for another week. These teams, experienced in wilderness tracking, noted several anomalies. The ground around Rebecca's tent showed minimal foot traffic for someone who'd been camping for several days. Her water bottles were nearly full, suggesting she hadn't been drinking regularly. Most puzzling, her journal, which friends said she wrote in obsessively, contained entries through June 18th, but nothing from June 19th onward. The last journal entry, photographed as evidence, read, "Wolves howling all night. Counted at least 6 distinct voices. Something else, too, further out. Not wolf, not elk. Almost like a woman crying, but wrong somehow." We'll investigate tomorrow. The darkness here is absolute. Even with the moon, can't see more than 10 feet. Feel like something's watching from beyond the light circle. Probably just a curious bear. Still, glad I brought the pepper spray. As summer progressed, theories proliferated. Some suggested Rebecca had encountered a grizzly, though no bear sign was found near the campsite. Others believed she'd fallen into one of the thermal features that dot the park, though none existed near Slough Creek. A few proposed she'd staged her own disappearance, though her bank accounts remained untouched, and her passport was found in her apartment. The FBI briefly investigated a connection to other missing persons cases in national parks, but found no pattern linking Rebecca's disappearance to others. In August, monsoon rains flooded Slough Creek, washing away any remaining trace evidence. The campsite where Rebecca's tent had stood became inaccessible for weeks. When waters receded, maintenance crews found the area transformed. Tons of sediment deposited where bare ground had been. Rebecca's case moved from active to cold. Another name added to the list of people who vanish in America's wilderness areas, each year without explanation. October brought the first snows to Yellowstone's high country. On October 23rd, a maintenance crew arrived at the Slough Creek campsites to remove bear boxes and prepare the area for winter closure. According to crew leader Tom Harrison, they almost skipped Site 2S5 because of its remote location, but regulations required checking every designated campsite. The ground where Rebecca's tent had stood 4 months earlier was now covered with fallen leaves and pine needles, looking undisturbed except for animal tracks. Harrison noticed it first, a slight depression in the earth where the tent had been, too regular to be natural settling. When he kicked away the leaves, the ground beneath felt different, softer, as if it had been excavated and refilled. The crew marked the spot and called for investigative rangers, following protocol for any unusual discovery in the backcountry. What started as routine maintenance was about to become a crime scene. The investigative team arrived the next morning with ground-penetrating radar. According to their report, the initial scan showed an anomaly approximately 3 feet beneath the surface, roughly cylindrical, about 18 inches in diameter. The object appeared to have been wrapped in something that reflected radar waves differently than surrounding soil. The team began careful excavation, photographing each layer as they descended through dirt that had clearly been disturbed months earlier. At 18 inches down, they encountered fabric, a heavy-duty nylon, that forensics would later identify as tent material. But this wasn't part of Rebecca's tent, which had been removed during the initial search. This was older, weathered, a different brand and color. Wrapped inside the fabric, they found what the technical report described as manufactured items of unusual configuration. The first object removed was a metal canister, roughly the size of a paint can, sealed with electrical tape. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, but not of wildlife. The photographs, processed at the FBI lab in Quantico, showed people in Yellowstone's backcountry, all taken without their knowledge. According to forensic analysis, some dated back years, showing hikers, campers, and park staff in various locations throughout the park. Rebecca appeared in 17 of them, dating from previous trips, spanning 3 years. In each photo, she was alone, unaware of being watched, engaged in routine activities like setting up camp, filtering water, or adjusting camera equipment. The photographer had been close, sometimes within 50 feet, hidden in vegetation or shadow. Beneath the canister, wrapped in plastic sheeting, investigators found what the report termed personal effects, inconsistent with typical camping equipment. A collection of women's jewelry, none of it Rebecca's according to her sister. Maps of backcountry areas with certain campsites circled in red ink. A GPS unit containing waypoints for remote locations throughout the park, each labeled with dates and initials that meant nothing to investigators. And at the bottom, wrapped most carefully, a journal written in cramped handwriting that would take FBI linguists weeks to fully decipher. The journal's author never identified themselves by name. The entries, dating back 5 years, described what the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit would later characterize as systematic surveillance of isolated individuals in wilderness settings. The writer described techniques for approaching campsites undetected, methods for disabling emergency beacons, and detailed observations of solo campers' routines. One entry from 2018 read, "They never look up. Even when they feel watched, they scan horizontally. The trees here are perfect for waiting. Some camps I've visited a dozen times, and they never knew." Rebecca was first mentioned in an entry from 2017. The Wolf Woman is back. 3rd year now, same campsite. She talks to herself when she thinks she's alone. Practices presentations about animal behavior. Last night she said my name, but she was asleep. How does she know? She can't. But hearing it spoken aloud after so long made me almost answer. The entries about Rebecca grew more detailed over time. The writer knew her work schedule, her favorite trails, her habit of singing while hiking. They knew she was allergic to bee stings, that she carried an EpiPen in her camera bag, that she preferred tea to coffee. An entry from May 2019 read, "She's planning something special for June. Heard her on the phone at the Gardner coffee shop. 5 nights at 2S5. Finally, been preparing that site for 2 years. Everything's ready." The FBI brought in additional resources, including forensic archaeologists, who expanded the excavation. They found more buried caches within a 100-yard radius of the campsite. According to the evidence report, these contained clothing, camping gear with labels removed, electronic devices with memory cards wiped clean, and implements that suggested long-term residence in the park's wilderness. One cache contained what investigators believed were trophies, personal items from multiple individuals, carefully cataloged with dates and locations. Analysis of the soil layers indicated the caches had been created over several years, the oldest perhaps a decade old. The person responsible had intimate knowledge of the area, understanding seasonal changes, water tables, and frost lines. They'd chosen locations that avoided both human traffic and animal disturbance. According to one investigator, it was like discovering an underground network, a parallel infrastructure invisible to the thousands of visitors who pass through each summer. The journal's final entries, dated June 2019, described preparation for what the author called the longest conversation. Plans were detailed for disabling Rebecca's emergency beacon, creating a chloroform substitute from materials available in the park, and transporting an unconscious person to a location marked only as the Deep Place on hand-drawn maps. The last entry, dated June 19th, was different from the others, almost fevered. "She looked right at me today, through the trees, straight at me. Didn't run, didn't scream, just stared, like she's been waiting too. Tonight, after the wolves quiet." Park investigators cross-referenced the journal with missing persons cases spanning 2 decades. According to their analysis, at least 7 disappearances showed patterns consistent with the journal's described methods. All involved solo wilderness users. All occurred in remote locations. All left behind perfectly organized campsites with no signs of struggle. The FBI expanded the investigation to include national forests and wilderness areas across 3 states. A forensic psychologist, brought in to analyze the journal, described the author as highly intelligent, technically proficient, and suffering from what they termed predatory isolation psychosis. The writer showed deep knowledge of wilderness survival, wildlife behavior, and human psychology. They'd created what the analyst called a parallel existence, living alongside normal park operations but remaining completely invisible. One entry suggested they'd even attended ranger training sessions, sitting in the back, taking notes, never speaking. The investigation faced a crucial problem. They had evidence of crimes, but no suspect. The DNA found on the buried items matched no one in any database. Fingerprints on the photographs were smudged beyond recognition. The handwriting matched no known samples. Even the photographs of Rebecca and others, while proving surveillance, provided no image of the photographer. Whoever had created these caches had been meticulous about avoiding self-incrimination. Park rangers began a systematic search of areas mentioned in the journal. They found more caches, temporary shelters built into natural features, and observation posts constructed in trees. According to one ranger, some of these structures were so well camouflaged they'd likely walked past them hundreds of times. The infrastructure suggested someone who didn't just visit the wilderness, but inhabited it full-time, moving seasonally, avoiding contact, living like a ghost. The search for Rebecca intensified with this new information. Teams focused on areas the journal called holding places, remote locations described as suitable for extended conversations. These proved to be natural caves, abandoned mine shafts, and dense thickets modified to create hidden spaces. In one such location, investigators found evidence of recent habitation, fresh ashes, food wrappers dated from June, and, disturbingly, strands of hair that DNA testing confirmed as Rebecca's. But Rebecca herself remained missing. The journal provided no clear indication of what the author intended as a final outcome. Some entries suggested a desire for companionship. Others hinted at darker purposes. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit believed Rebecca might still be alive, held somewhere in the park's vast wilderness. But as November snows began to close access to the backcountry, the window for searching was rapidly closing. On November 15th, a wildlife researcher studying wolf movements detected an unusual GPS signal from a collar that should have been inactive. The collar, from a wolf that had died 2 years earlier, was somehow transmitting from a location deep in the Absaroka wilderness. When investigators reached the coordinates, they found the collar had been modified, its GPS unit replaced with a different transmitter. Nearby, carved into an aspen tree, was a message. She wanted to understand wolves. Now she runs with them. Stop looking. The investigation continued through winter, using satellite imagery and winter-capable teams. The Park Service closed entire sections to visitors, citing wildlife management needs. According to internal reports, rangers were finding more evidence of the mysterious inhabitant. Modified caves stocked with supplies, trail cameras, that had been recording park visitors for years, and detailed maps of every structure, trail, and hiding place in 1,000 square miles of wilderness. In December, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A retired ranger, reviewing the evidence, recognized the handwriting in the journal. 30 years earlier, he'd investigated the disappearance of a Park Service employee's child, a boy who'd vanished during a family camping trip. The child, Marcus Webb, was never found, presumed drowned in the Yellowstone River. But the ranger had kept the boy's school notebooks, and the handwriting evolution, from child to adult, was unmistakable. Marcus Webb had never left the park. Records showed Marcus had been 10 when he disappeared in 1989. His father, a backcountry ranger, had reported him missing after he wandered from camp during a thunderstorm. The massive search had found no trace. His family had left Yellowstone soon after, unable to bear the memories. If Marcus had survived, he'd have spent 30 years in the wilderness, growing up outside civilization, developing skills and psychologies shaped entirely by isolation and observation of both wildlife and humans. The FBI brought in survival experts to assess how a child could have survived alone in Yellowstone. According to their analysis, it was theoretically possible if the child found shelter quickly, learned to avoid predators, and discovered food sources. The park's thermal features could provide winter warmth, and numerous accounts existed of lost children surviving extended periods in wilderness. But 30 years represented something unprecedented, a complete severance from human society while remaining within its boundaries. The investigation team developed a psychological profile of Marcus Webb. A child who'd survived such isolation would likely develop profound social dysfunction, possibly viewing other humans as another species to be studied rather than beings to connect with. The journal entries supported this, showing fascination with human behavior, but inability to understand social connections. One entry read, "Watched a couple arguing at Slough Creek. Don't understand the anger. Animals never waste energy on past events. Humans carry their yesterdays, like stones in their packs." As winter deepened, the search for both Rebecca and Marcus continued with limited success. Motion-triggered cameras were placed throughout the backcountry, but whoever was out there understood their placement patterns, avoiding them entirely. Rangers found evidence of recent movement, fresh tracks appearing overnight, but always one step behind. The Park Service faced a dilemma: how to find someone who knew the park better than anyone alive, who'd spent 3 decades learning every hidden corner. In January, thermal imaging from a research flight detected a heat signature in an area called Cache Creek, a drainage so remote it hadn't been officially surveyed since the 1970s. The location matched coordinates mentioned in the journal as the Winter Place. A specialized team was assembled, including negotiators trained in dealing with isolated individuals. They approached carefully, understanding they were dealing with someone who'd view them as invaders in what he'd considered his territory for 30 years. The team found a sophisticated shelter built into a natural cave, expanded over years to include multiple chambers. According to their report, it contained supplies suggesting long-term habitation, preserved food, handmade tools, clothing patched from various sources, and walls covered with writings and drawings depicting wildlife, landscapes, and disturbing sketches of park visitors. But the inhabitant was gone, apparently warned by some undetected early warning system. In one chamber, they found what appeared to be a shrine of sorts. Photographs of park visitors arranged chronologically, Rebecca's photo placed centrally, surrounded by her belongings, her camera, and journal entries written in her handwriting but describing experiences she'd never had. The writings suggested someone trying to understand her by becoming her, copying her words, her interests, her way of seeing the world. One entry, dated after her disappearance, read in her copied handwriting, "The wolves accepted me today. Marcus was right. You just have to surrender to the silence." The discovery suggested something more complex than kidnapping. The behavioral analysis team theorized that Marcus, if he was indeed the inhabitant, had developed a delusional belief system where bringing someone into his world was an act of liberation rather than captivity. The journal entries about Rebecca showed not predatory intent, but a distorted form of connection, an attempt to share a life he believed superior to civilization. The search continued through February, hampered by severe weather. Teams found more evidence of Marcus's presence: food caches buried in patterns matching bear behavior, observation blinds built into cliffsides, and trail markers visible only to someone who knew exactly where to look. According to one tracker, following his trail was like tracking wind, traces appearing and disappearing without logic, suggesting movement patterns learned from decades of wildlife observation. On March 3rd, a pilot reported seeing two figures near Heart Lake, a frozen expanse in Yellowstone's remote southern section. By the time ground teams arrived, they found only tracks: two sets of footprints walking together, one matching Rebecca's boot size, the other larger, worn smooth like moccasins. The tracks led onto lake ice, then simply stopped, as if the walkers had vanished. Holes cut in the ice suggested fishing, but no other sign remained. The FBI interviewed experts in Stockholm Syndrome and captivity psychology. According to their assessment, if Rebecca had survived months with her captor, she might have developed psychological dependencies that would complicate rescue. The isolated environment, combined with her existing connection to wilderness and wildlife, could create conditions where she might resist return to civilization. One psychologist noted that her journal entries had always showed ambivalence about human society, preferring animal company. Spring brought new searches as snow melted and access improved. In April, hikers reported seeing a woman matching Rebecca's description near Shoshone Lake, but she disappeared into forest before anyone could approach. The witness said she moved differently than a typical hiker, almost gliding through underbrush, and was accompanied by someone who remained just out of clear sight. When investigators arrived, they found a recently abandoned camp, still warm ashes, and Rebecca's veterinary license placed prominently on a rock. The message seemed clear. She was alive, but not seeking rescue. The FBI faced an unprecedented situation. Even if they found Rebecca, could they remove her against her will if she showed no signs of physical restraint? Legal experts debated whether someone held captive for months could make rational decisions about their freedom. The Park Service struggled with whether to publicize the situation, potentially endangering both Rebecca and Marcus, while dealing with someone who'd evaded detection for 3 decades. In May, almost a year after Rebecca's disappearance, a final piece of evidence emerged. A memory card was found at a ranger station, left sometime during the night. It contained recent photographs clearly taken with Rebecca's camera. The images showed her alive, thin but apparently healthy, in locations throughout the park. In some photos, a shadowy figure was visible at the frame's edge. The final image showed Rebecca facing the camera, holding a piece of paper with a message. "Stop looking. I'm already found." The investigation officially continues, though active searching has been suspended. The Park Service has implemented new protocols for solo backcountry users and increased ranger patrols in remote areas. The FBI maintains the case as open, believing both Rebecca Torres and Marcus Webb remain within Yellowstone's boundaries. Occasional sightings are reported but never confirmed. Equipment disappears from backcountry caches and reappears modified in ways that suggest someone is still watching, still learning, still living between the human and wild worlds. Rebecca's family has accepted she may never return. Her sister Sarah told investigators she'd rather believe Rebecca chose her path than was forced onto it. The journal entries found in Rebecca's apartment, written before her trip, showed increasing dissatisfaction with modern life, a yearning for something she couldn't define. One entry asked, "What would it be like to disappear completely, to become part of the landscape rather than a visitor to it?" The case has prompted re-examination of other long-term disappearances in national parks. Patterns have emerged suggesting some missing persons might not be victims, but voluntary exiles, drawn to those who've already made the transition from civilization to wilderness. The Park Service doesn't publicize these theories, but rangers now look differently at solo visitors who spend long periods in the backcountry, wondering who might be looking back. Marcus Webb, if he exists, as investigators believe, has never been photographed as an adult. The boy who disappeared in 1989 would be 40 years old now, with 30 years of wilderness living experience. Forensic psychologists suggest he might no longer be capable of returning to society. His neural pathways shaped entirely by isolation and survival. He's become something between human and wild, a bridge Rebecca might have chosen to cross. The buried caches continue to be discovered, each revealing more about a parallel life lived in America's first national park. The infrastructure suggests not mental illness, but adaptation, a successful, if disturbing, solution to survival outside society. Some investigators believe Marcus isn't alone, that others like Rebecca have joined him over the years, forming a shadow community, invisible to the millions who visit Yellowstone annually. The park remains open, its wilderness as beautiful and dangerous as ever. But rangers now know that the greatest mystery isn't the geological wonders or wildlife, but what human transformation is possible in true isolation. Somewhere in those millions of acres, Rebecca Torres and Marcus Webb continued their existence, neither lost nor found, occupying a space between civilization and wildness that most people can't imagine. Visitors still camp at Site 2S5 along Slough Creek, unaware of its history. The ground where Rebecca's tent stood shows no sign of disturbance. Nature has reclaimed the evidence, as it always does in Yellowstone. But sometimes, hikers report feeling watched, seeing movement in peripheral vision, hearing footsteps that match their pace but remain always just out of sight. They attribute it to imagination, to the park's wild atmosphere. They pack up and hike out, returning to their lives, never knowing how close they came to those who chose differently. The official investigation remains open but inactive. File boxes of evidence sit in FBI storage, photographs and journal entries. documenting a life that shouldn't be possible, but apparently is. The case of Rebecca Torres has no conclusion, no resolution, only a transformation that challenges understanding of choice, captivity, and what it means to be lost or found. In the end, Yellowstone keeps its secrets, and those who enter its deepest wilderness might find more than solitude. They might find those who've made solitude their salvation.